Welcome to tonight's class on Parashat Pinchas from Rabbi Leib Heyman. And tonight, Rabbi Leib is going to share with us an amazing contrast between Moshe Rabbeinu and Yehushua bin Nun. Just as an introduction, Rabbi Leib, just to bring us up to speed of where we are in the Torah, I guess in the chronology of events. In this week's Torah portion, we find ourselves at the end, close to the end, of the 40 years of the Jewish people's wandering in the wilderness. Already 2 weeks ago, Parashat Chukat, Miriam and Aharon both pass away. And right after that, Arad, the king of Canaan, wages war and attacks the Jewish people. They win. Sichon, the king of Emor, comes and he also attacks. Jewish people win. Then we had Balak and Bilam with their plans to harm the Jewish people by cursing them. They were unsuccessful. They sent the daughters of Moab to entice the Jewish people. 24,000 Jews pass away from an epidemic, and then Pinchas comes and saves the day, restores Hashem's honor by executing Zimri and Cozbi. The plague comes to a halt, and the Jewish people are now ready to enter the land of Israel. However, in this week's Torah portion, we see that God commands Moshe Rabbeinu to make a final census, a final count of how many Jews there are. And Hashem even tells Moshe to go up to Har Ha'avarim, to take him to the top of this mountain to see the land of Israel before passing away. Take a look at your screen. We are in Numbers chapter 27, verse 12. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. God tells Moses, Ale el Har Ha'avarim hazeh. Go up to Har Ha'avarim, u'et ha'aretz asher natati livnei Israel, and now look at the land that I'm going to be giving to the Jewish people. Next verse, verse 13. V'ra'ita ota v'nesafta alamecha gamata. Now after you see it, now you can pass away. Kasher nesaf Aaron achicha, the same way as your brother passed on. So here the Torah is telling us that Moses is being shown the land of Israel and then being told that he is going to pass away. Moses at that point asks God, after realizing he will not enter the land of Israel, he asks God for a successor, someone else to take his place to continue leading the Jewish people. As we know, they definitely need someone to lead them. Look what it says. Vaydaber Moshe el Hashem lemor. Now Moses speaks to Hashem, saying, 27 verse 16, Yipaked Hashem elokei haruchot lechol basar ish al ha'edad. Let the Lord, the God of spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation. Says Rashi, do you know who he had in mind? Moshe originally wanted his own son to be his successor, to take his place. Hashem answered him, I don't think so. I did not have him in mind as your successor. Rather, I had Joshua in mind as your successor. And the reason for Joshua, for Yehoshua, 1 second. Okay, sorry. I guess my battery's dying on my mouse. Take a look at your screen. The reason why Joshua, as it says in Exodus chapter 33, verse 11, it says over here, Umshareto Yehoshua bin Nun, and his attendant Joshua, the son of Nun, Nar lo yamish mitoch ha'oel. He was a lad, he was young, and he would not depart from the tent. Explains our commentaries that Yehoshua bin Nun was so committed to Moshe Rabbeinu, he did not stop learning from him. And therefore, God decided that he would be the one to be chosen as Moshe Rabbeinu's successor. So now Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu to appoint him, to appoint Joshua and not his son. Look at this, chapter 27, verse 18. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Hashem tells Moses, Kach lecha et Yehoshua bin Nun, take Joshua, ish asher ruach bo, a man of spirit, v'samachta et yadecha alav, and place your hand on his head. And that is how you are going to appoint him. Okay. Then he does so. He is actually transferring the leadership that he had onto his faithful student, disciple Joshua. One last verse I want to share with you. Sorry, it's actually going to be two. Take a look. Here we go. 27:20. V'natata meodecha alav, and you shall place some of your majesty upon him, l'man yishmu kol adat b'nei Israel, so that the entire nation of Israel will heed to him. One last verse, couple later, verse 23. Vayismoch et yadav alav vaytzaveu kasher diber Hashem biyad Moshe. And Moses did everything Hashem told him, but he placed his hands, not his hand, his hands on Joshua, and he anointed him and appointed him as the new leader of the Jewish people. So with this introduction, there's so many just little things we mentioned, but Reb Leib's going to get into them. With this introduction, Reb Leib goes to compare Moshe and Yehoshua, as Rashi does in a verse we just read in chapter 27, verse 20, that when he placed some of his majesty on him, Rashi explains, based on the Talmud, that Moshe's face was like the sun, and Yeshua's face was like the moon. So Reb Leib goes on to giving three different comparisons, three different ways that we could understand this comparison between Moshe being like the sun and Yehoshua being like the moon. The first I'm going to do super briefly because in truth, even Reb Leib says it's a big, big novelty, big chidush, and it's probably not the basic interpretation of what it means. But to make a long story short, Reb Leib says that Moshe Rabbeinu, it all depends on how you interpret what the word penei, face, means. Does it mean face or does it mean source of? And really, Reb Leib says that Moshe Rabbeinu was the source of the light of the sun, which he says was the Or HaGanuz, the light that was from day one creation and saved and hidden in the Torah. And that would make Moshe Rabbeinu this first hidden light, and Yehoshua really the sun, which lights up the moon. Not going to get into that too deep, because even Reb Leib says it's not the simple understanding. So we're going to move on to the next two explanations, which are way more easy to understand and also have a very nice practical lesson. So his second interpretation of this contrast between moon and sun and moon, and that's Moshe Rabbeinu and Yehoshua, is that Yehoshua is likened to the moon, just as the moon doesn't have a light of its own, rather it only reflects the light that it receives from the sun. This is a concept we've spoken about multiple times. In this case, the sun being Moshe Rabbeinu, shedding light onto his disciple Joshua. So Reb Leib says, if we truly go and think about it, if we contemplate, if it were not for Moshe Rabbeinu's involvement in Joshua's development, there's no way that Joshua could have ever rose to be the next leader of the Jewish people, and he proves it in three different ways. First is when Moshe Rabbeinu sent Joshua to lead the Jewish people in battle against Amalek. Moshe Rabbeinu told him, and take a look at your screen, Exodus chapter 17, verse 9. Vayomer Moshe el Yehoshua bechar lanu anashim v'tzelachem b'Amalek. Moses tells Joshua, go pick men and go fight Amalek. Because tomorrow, machar anochi nitzav al rosh ha'ar, tomorrow Moshe says, I'm going to stand at the top of the mountain, al rosh ha'giva u'mateh elokim bi'adi. Basically, he was saying, I was going to pray for you the entire time. So it seems, Reb Leib says that if Moshe Rabbeinu would not have prayed for Joshua's success to fight and actually win the war of Amalek, he would have not won. It's number one. Second is Joshua was also in need of Moshe's help when he was sent as one of the spies, one of the 12 spies into the land of Israel. If we contrast Joshua to Kalev, because Kalev and Joshua were the only two who did not come back with a negative report, Kalev stopped on his own by the patriarch's gravesite to pray that he would not have any negative influence from the other spies, and that seemed sufficient enough for him not to fall and stumble. However, Joshua needed a special prayer from Moshe Rabbeinu and a name change, an extra letter Yud, to change his name through prayer of Moshe Rabbeinu in order that he would not fall and be influenced by the other tribes. Again, without Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer and intervention, Joshua probably would have never saved himself out of that issue. Third, Joshua's appointment as Moshe Rabbeinu's successor was, as we just mentioned, completed by when Moshe Rabbeinu placed his hands on his head, giving Joshua part of the radiant light, that or panim, that glow that Moshe Rabbeinu had. Part of that was given to Joshua, actually. But we also realize that Moshe Rabbeinu did not place one of his hands on Joshua's head, as God commanded. He placed both his hands. Why both his hands? Because he wanted to show that he was wholeheartedly, sincerely giving over a transfer of leadership and power to Joshua. The Maharsha brings Reb Leib, says that one hand of Moses gave him strength, and the other hand gave Joshua wisdom. He wanted to give him a complete success. And then Reb Leib goes into, well, where do we see that the idea of placing a hand on a head is something meaningful? We see that by Jacob. When Jacob brought Joseph's two children, Menashe and Ephraim, in front of him, what did he do? He placed his hands on their head, and he actually transformed them from being grandchildren to children. He made them as one of the tribes. As the verse says, Genesis chapter 48, verse 5, that Kir'uven v'Shimon Yuli, they're going to be like Reuven and Shimon. So Yaakov's blessings with the hand placing on his grandchildren was the first of turning grandchildren into children. And here Moshe Rabbeinu was the first in showing how a successor is appointed through placing of hands on their head. Again, Reb Leib proving that Joshua's success was based on not only, of course, his own deeds. Of course, he was worthy of it, but it seemed like it would have been impossible if it was not for Moshe Rabbeinu's involvement in his development all along the way. And still, Hashem said that Joshua was the right person. That Joshua was the right person to succeed Moshe Rabbeinu in leading the Jewish people. It seems, one last point before we move on to the third interpretation of Reb Leib, is it seems that Yeshua's dependency on Moshe Rabbeinu was so strong that even after after Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, Yehushua forgot 300 halachot, 300 laws, and he only remembered them later on by when Otniel ben Kenaz was questioning Yehushua, and then he started remembering them slowly. But Yehushua was so dependent and so I guess talui, dependent is the best word, on his master Moshe Rabbeinu, on his Rebbe, that he was not the same without him. Just like the moon is almost nothing without the sun. It gives no light besides for whatever light it receives from the sun. So that's one interpretation, the interpretation of how Moshe is the influencer and Yehoshua was the influenced. That's the second interpretation. The third interpretation is based on the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which gives us a chain of transmission of the Torah, that Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, transmitted to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets, and then to the great assembly of men. And on that Mishnah, Rashi gives us the interpretation, the explanation, that Joshua was best fit for this job, better than Pinchas and better than any other one of the elders because of his commitment to learning Torah and learning from Moshe Rabbeinu, as we showed in Exodus chapter 33, verse 11. However, Reb Leib says it seems from Rashi that the next best pick would have been Pinchas. So he wants to know, why was Pinchas not chosen? Why is Pinchas the next best pick? He wants to know. And then also, why is Pinchas not chosen? What made Yehoshua greater than Pinchas? And Reb Leib says it was because of the level of humility that Yehoshua attained. Again, it seems like a recurring concept, because the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu was given his position was because of his humility. So yeah, it makes great sense how Yehoshua's humility is what made him win the place of successor even over Yehoshua. And he says that we can see that Yehoshua was called Hosea 3 times in the Torah. Correct? His name was really Hosea, and then it was changed to Yehoshua with the Yud. So 3 times in the Torah, Reb Leib says that Yehoshua was mentioned as his original name, Yehoshua, twice at the beginning of the episode of the spies, and one was way after his name change, and that was at the Parashat Ha'azinu, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 44, where Rashi explains over there that Moshe and Yehoshua had mutual respect for one another, and Moshe actually specifically instituted that Yehoshua would have a spokesperson even while Moshe was still alive, so no one would think that he is trying to become arrogant later on. And the fact was that Hosea was mentioned later on in that name to attest to his humility, even though his new name was Yehoshua. But Reb Leib says now, according to that, why was Yehoshua named Yehoshua or mentioned Yehoshua in the Torah before the name change? See, before the name change, there was already the battle of Amalek. In the battle of Amalek, the Torah already alludes to him as Yehoshua, not Hosea. So why is his name being mentioned before even the name change? So Reb Leib says the Torah is teaching us that there are certain times when a person has to act with complete humility, and there's other times that a person has to act with great strength. When it came to being a messenger amongst the princes of each tribe to go and spy out the land of Israel, that is obviously a time to be completely humble. Hosea he's mentioned as. And obviously when one's in front of their master, their teacher, their Rebbe, that's a time to act with complete humility. He's mentioned Hosea. But in contrast, when someone has to go out to war, here specifically when Yehoshua had to go lead the Jewish people out to war against Amalek, that was a proper time for Yehoshua to use and act with his strength as a leader. So he was called Yehoshua in the Torah. When it comes to Pinchas, however, he was a great, great tzaddik, yet the Midrash tells us that he was lacking in one little aspect of humility. He was very humble. So that's why he's a runner-up. Right, Moshe? Then to replace him was Yehoshua, but if it wouldn't have been Yehoshua, it would have been Pinchas. Why Pinchas? Because he was very humble, but there was one time that he wasn't humble, and that is when Yiftach HaGiladi, which was one of the judges, one of the Shofetim of the Jewish people, he made a vow that if he will defeat Ammon at war, the first thing to leave his house will be sacrificed. When he came back from war, the first thing to leave his house was unfortunately his only daughter. And he didn't know what to do. Should I sacrifice her as I promised, as I would do? But that doesn't make sense. That wasn't my intention. So he called for Pinchas to come and annul the vow. And Pinchas said, I'm not in town. You want me to annul the vow? Come to me. Yiftach said, I just won the war. You owe everything to me. You should come to me. And they both went back and forth. Neither of them wanted to compromise one another. And because of that, Pinchas lost his Ruach HaKodesh. He lost his divine inspiration, his divine intervention. He lost it because of that. So what we see is that Pinchas was not as humble as Yehoshua. Last thing to end off, Reb Leib says, is on the topic of humility. We know that Yehushua had a great teacher of the whole character trait of humility, and that was obviously Moshe Rabbeinu. But we must say that Yehushua fell short to Moshe Rabbeinu in one aspect of humility, because the Torah testifies that Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble that ever walked the face of this earth, not Joshua. So where was it that Yehushua fell short to Moshe Rabbeinu in the aspect of humility? So Leib says, that there was one time that the Satan, the evil inclination, came to Moshe Rabbeinu and confronted Moshe Rabbeinu and said, how is it that you received the Torah directly from God, you human being? Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, I didn't. It wasn't me. And Hashem came to him and said, how could you say that to the Satan? I know he's coming and he's trying to start up with you, but how could you say it wasn't you? Of course it was you. Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm not worthy of anything. You chose me, but I'm not worthy of anything. As a reward, Moshe Rabbeinu was said that the Torah would be called based on his name. How do we call the Torah? We call it the 5 books of Moses. It's called Torat Moshe. And because of his great humility, he was rewarded that the Torah would be called based on his name. In a similar situation, in an opportunity to avoid any pride of the amount of Torah one knows or knew, Yehushua almost had it, but he missed it there. You see, when Moshe Rabbeinu was about to pass away, he called for Joshua and he told him, do you have any final questions or clarifications before I pass away? And he told him, no, Rabbi, I'm good. I got it. Because of that, he forgot those 300 halachot, as we mentioned, and he also had 700 sfekot, doubts. He completely forgot 300 laws, and there were 700 laws that he was in doubt of because of a minute level of arrogance at his high level of Yehushua that he displayed. So this trait that Yehushua had of humility was very powerful, more powerful than Pinchas, more powerful than anyone else, but still fell short a little to Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is how Reb Leib explains the slim difference of humility that between Moshe and Yehushua, which is similar to the moon and the sun. You see, remember what the moon did in the 4th day of creation. He said, came to Hashem and said, Hashem, how could there be two kings sharing the same crown? So the Hashem said, no problem, you're right. You won't be the two the same. Moon, diminish yourself. What did the moon do? The moon diminished itself 400 times. Hashem never told it to diminish that much. He sent it to diminish a little. He could have done a little bit. Because the moon diminished itself so much as an act of humility, even though he started off not humble, but he still was humble in essence, Hashem blessed the moon, that the moon would always come out with companions, with an entourage, and as the stars. But nevertheless, the moon's level of humility was slightly not as humble as the sun. And therefore, the difference between the sun and the moon, like Moshe Rabbeinu and Yehushua. So just as a quick recap, a lot of things going on over here. Again, Reb Leib tells us that he wants to give us 3 different interpretations to this contrast between the sun and the moon, which is really, as the Talmud and Rashi say, Moshe and Yehushua. The first one was that really Moshe is the light of the first day, the Or HaGanuz, and Yehushua is the sun. That's a rogue interpretation, not run-of-the-mill. Then 2 more accepted or regularly interpreted ones. One of them being Moshe as the influencer, the sun, and Yehushua the influenced and dependent on Moshe Rabbeinu being the moon. And this last interpretation was that it was Yehushua's humility, which was like the humility of the moon, is what he had, with a slight defect, opposed to Moshe Rabbeinu, who was like the sun, no defected humility in any way. The lesson, I guess, is clear. It's screaming out to us. It's already 9:07. Class is over. I know with my high school boys, if I go over, they're already fidgety and antsy, and the bell rings, and then I guess it's all over. Thank God there's no bell over here, so we're good. But okay, I see some students already walking away. No, I'm joking. But the lesson is obvious. It's clear that humility is something which is so important. If a person wants to be appointed or given even the opportunity to lead others and help others and succeed in any way with other people, the way to do it is through humility. That was Moshe Rabbeinu's success. That was Joshua's success. Even Pinchas's success. Yes, he was also great in so many ways. His level of humility had two little nicks in it. Moshe's humility was perfect. Joshua's had one nick in it, but still like 99% there. And Pinchas's humility had two nicks. He was 98% there. But nevertheless, we see this recurring thing that humility is something which is attractive. People want to be around someone who's humble. Humility is also something which allows a person to be helpful to others, to lead others down the right path, and only great and good things. So let us all hope that we can be lights onto others as the sun is onto the moon, and to be real influencers in positive and great ways to others, and only provide blessing, light, goodness to our family and friends, all through a channel of humility, so we just learned, and based on the previous lesson, on and with peace and unity. Thank you everyone for coming. If anyone has any questions, go for it.